really cool to do a dialogue.
Please serve yourselves.
I think it's
But if you use any email, that was the one.
How are you? You want to sit up front?
I got back last night, but I'm leaving again this afternoon. I got back last night. And then I got home around 9 o'clock last night, and then I'm leaving at 4:45. So I had to unpack Arizona. The good news is that I don't have to pack a lot for my Arizona trip because a lot of because I'm going to my house. But I'm going out.
We're celebrating tonight.
Not celebrating, rather.
I'll be right back.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm looking forward to the nice lightning final. I think Julie and I will finish that fight.
We sold the soul to the devil.
She predicted. That Satan says, you see what he
Like, picture.
Oh no.
It's usually about 40 hours a week. And try to maybe 1 or 2 shifts, so you're sure you can. So that's what they do for school. Play the this week. Fairly short. But my guess is pretty going fast. There's quite a few people. Bubble hockey to have all access. Night version. That's funny, they just walked away.
So I just left her a voicemail and left myself in there. But I think that's what it is. Is that I think it's usually set up that it has to be that way if it ended up being shared with somebody, they weren't outside of that. But we noticed that sometimes people are doing it.
Missed April just a couple weeks ago for a discussion.
That's not the issue. Maybe you should catch that. It's not shared. But if you're using regular teachers, you're accessing that or you accidentally access that first and then back. So that was the issue earlier, so I don't know if that's true. Because we may have to sign up on it, so I resent mine So I had true, yeah. Although I filled out your plan, it was so much easier that it's like when we first had all they talk about right now.
There's training.
just finished setting up.
What was the winter Texas? Something travel. That's my favorite quality. Travel with a very small bag.
And then I always schedule, and then on Monday, the day that you're at the legislature, we always
So, it'll be nice to have a lot of things.
this year, for the general assembly session, which I go and then downside of that, there's not enough. But, Governor, Secretary of State, found out about it this late to spend time, so I was going to go back and read everything. And then I was so one of the things that was really interesting yesterday was in the chambers told us all about females and that was really special. That was really a bunch of us went and did a pocket because we met
So I'm debating on I was doing it at just before I got here, which I thought people rushed.
Okay, well, welcome. Thank you all for coming. We are very, very honored to have Professor Michelle Oberman. We get some nice background music. Is that, where's that coming from? This is nice. Probably not as
Vegas.
okay, good to you, but not. All right. Professor Michelle Oberman, as I said, we're very honored to have her. She teaches at Santa Clara School of Law at University of Santa Clara University. I got that right. She really is a nationally recognized scholar. I've known her work for a long time, and she's really done path-breaking work in the area of reproductive autonomy. Some of the really difficult issues, starting with the problem of women using drugs during pregnancy. She's written about mothers who kill children. And what she's going to talk about today is this book, which is really a terrific, built on terrific research, where she's been in El Salvador and Oklahoma, and studying what happens in the real world when the rubber hits the road, when you have restrictive abortion laws, and the impact that has on women. And I've heard this talk, and it's really a wonderful talk, so it's great to have her here. And she was kind enough to bring some books. So they're only $15, so if you'd like to buy one, you can do that. Thank you for coming, and take it away.
Thank you so much for having me here today. I want to thank David for making it possible, and Hai for her just seamless handling of all the details that are so easily bungled when they're left to me. So I'm grateful to both of you. Grateful to all of you for letting me speak about what is, I think, my deepest passion these days, but I think increasingly something that should be all of our passions. And I want to note that although the book is now out a year, it feels like the ground has shifted so dramatically that the talk that I would have given, or that I gave, I guess, a year ago, November, before the book came out, feels really different today. And some parts of it that feel different are obvious, the shift on the Supreme Court, and other parts are just the way that over time things are shifting in me. So I cringe a little bit at the pronouns that I use throughout the book. It's her, and it's all women who are pregnant, and yet in the world that I live in, I understand that it really isn't just women, and that there is a phenomena out there that is really helping to degender and unhook these issues in ways that I think we're only at the beginning of now, and just sort of can't quite predict. So this is a quote that one of my college teachers said pretty regularly in class when a student would have like a I know moment. And she would say, and she actually kind of shifted, she'd say, thinking is better than knowing, but seeing is better than thinking. So I want to bear that in mind, because I've come to understand that our abortion war is completely misguided, because everyone on all sides of it thinks they know what happens when abortion becomes illegal. And it turns out that both sides are wrong. So I came to the study of abortion indirectly as an academic with a long-standing interest in an even sadder subject than abortion, the subject of mothers who kill their children. One of maybe a handful of folks who've looked seriously at that problem over time. I have a public health degree, so I tend to look at things and notice patterns and then think about prevention. I also teach criminal law, so I'm pretty interested in how the cases get processed in the system. And it occurred to me once I moved out to Santa Clara and was at a school that was really committed to a social justice vision and was willing to let me take my little pocket of research money and do whatever I wanted, it occurred to me that it could be really interesting to see what happens around mothers killing their children in a country where abortion was completely illegal. Right? And so if you look at this map here, you'll notice there's reds and greens. The greens are the countries where abortion is relatively unrestricted. Some available, like here, on demand. Others available freely in the first 3 months of a pregnancy. I wanted to go to the red parts of the world, and because I speak Spanish, I wanted to go to Latin America. I chose to go to Chile in 2009. Actually, no, first in 2008. And I went there because at the time it had the strictest law on abortion in the world. It banned abortion under all circumstances, even when a woman's life is at stake. And there was a pretty sophisticated law professor there who I made contact with, who had defended the prosecutions of women and doctors charged with breaking the law. So I went down there, and again, my hypothesis was, if I'm studying women who kill their children, what I'm going to see is in a country like Chile where you can't have an abortion, maybe you're going to have more women killing their children because they couldn't terminate during pregnancy. Maybe you'll have more of this phenomena that's called neonaticide, women who conceal their pregnancies, give birth unattended, baby dies within that first, outside of the hospital, within that first day of life. So that was my theory, and I went down. And again, like, I knew what I was going to find there. I suspected because of the abortion ban, there'd be a whole lot less abortion in Chile, and that there'd be dead women or women dying in hospitals. Right? My set point told me with some certainty when abortion is illegal, women die, and it's a little bit harder to get than it's going to be in those green countries. From the moment I got there, though, nothing was as it seemed to me. I met doctors, lawyers, midwives, women's health advocates, and I got completely distracted from my issue of, like, okay, what happens with infanticide and where are these cases? Because what was happening on the streets was that abortion was commonplace. The first doctor I interviewed ran the largest women's health center in Santiago, so the biggest city in the country, largest women's health center. I went there looking for the women dying from illegal abortions. He said, there aren't any. This is 2008. You can buy abortion drugs on the street anytime you like. I was pretty confused. Went home, scratching my head, wondering what the point of having the strictest law in the world against abortion is. If it's not enforced, you can't catch the women, anybody can buy the drugs on the street. So a few months later, I got the opportunity to go to El Salvador and be kind of a fly on the wall at the first binational meeting of El Salvador and Nicaragua, who were respectively in that year, I think, 10 years and 5 years into their experiences with laws just like Chile's, complete bans. In 1998, El Salvador completely banned abortion on all grounds. Nicaragua followed in 2004. Over the course of that meeting, I realized that El Salvador was different from Chile and also different from Nicaragua. So at that time in the world, those were the three countries with complete bans. El Salvador was different because they were really endeavoring to enforce their law. Prosecutors from the state would go to hospitals around the country. It's geographically quite small. They would lecture doctors on the obligation to report women suspected of having terminated their pregnancies. There were women in prison for having terminated their pregnancies. And I signed on for the duration. It was just a fascinating conference, and it was a small enough place that I had met everybody I needed to get my research launched. And I went back 10 times, 11 now, over the sort of intervening 10 years. And I have met with lawyers, judges, government officials, religious leaders, professors. I've gone to prison several times now and met with women who are incarcerated. I've met with women who were formerly incarcerated, now exonerated. And during our time today, what I want to do is use that research to tell you two things. First of all, share with you what I know about what happens today when abortion's banned, because it's not what you think. And number two, show you why I think our battle over abortion here in this country is so misguided, no matter what side of the debate you find yourself on. So what happens when abortion, so here's El Salvador's law. I'm a law professor, so I can't get my lines to line up. But just so you understand what I mean by like a complete ban, every ground on which you could imagine in the world an exception to a ban on abortion is not permissible. Complete ban in El Salvador. So the first thing that happens when abortion is banned is actually what doesn't happen. It doesn't go away. And this is a messy slide, slightly out of date. It's the best data that we have. It's pulled from The Lancet, the British Medical Journal. But it is a slide that actually, I think I might be able to do this, right? So this is a slide that talks about, in raw numbers of millions of abortions, and contrasts North America down here in the green, if you remember our map, with Latin America, that's almost all red. And what you see is, well, they've got a lot of abortions, but the raw number doesn't really matter. What's significant is the rate. And so if you look at the rate of abortions between 1990 and 1994, you had around 20 abortions per 1,000 women of reproductive age in any given year. And in Latin America, you have a significantly higher number. Significantly higher, in spite of the fact that it's all red, right? The other thing I want you to notice, though, is what's been in the news a lot lately, which is that our abortion rates are dropping in this country. They're, in fact, lower right now than they have been at any year since Roe v. Wade. So in any year since 1973. We've had fewer abortions than we've ever had at any point since we've been counting. By contrast, in Latin America, the rates are not just higher than ours, they're going up. The rates are going up. Right? So the first thing that happens is when abortion is banned is it doesn't really go away, right? And I think that it's useful to think about why it doesn't go away. And again, it's a thing that sort of stares us straight in the face, and yet the way that we fight about abortion, we don't look straight on. So abortion rates are related to poverty. They're related to the cost of motherhood, how expensive it is to have a child. In El Salvador, although because it's illegal, it's hard to get official data, people live on $2 a day on average. It's a very poor country. The Ministry of Health within El Salvador, so its own government office, in tracking hospital admissions, which is how the world tracks, you can sort of, how many births you'd expect from 1,000 women of reproductive age. When the birth rates aren't there, then you check hospital admissions, you check to see contraceptive use. So you're kind of like looking at the puzzle and then subtracting out and noticing what's left in order to get your figure on how many abortions there must be. Government's own rate suggests close to 20,000 abortions in that 3-year period that they had a relatively liberal government and decided to try to figure out how the ban was working. The Guttmacher Institute, which is the research arm of Planned Parenthood, estimates that there's at least 35,000 abortions a year in El Salvador, a country of 6 million people. And this is what illegal abortion looks like. This is cytotec or misoprostol. It is widely available throughout the world with the exception of Africa, where they're working on increasing availability because it is a drug that has single-handedly turned around the problem of postpartum hemorrhage, causing us to have a worldwide plunge in deaths of mothers during childbirth. It's an amazingly effective drug at bringing on contractions in the uterus and stopping hemorrhage. And so when a woman, the highest cause of death from postpartum hemorrhage is just that they can't figure out how to stop the bleeding. This cheap drug costs less than $2 to make, has turned that around. It's therefore on the formulary of every country in the world. The World Health Organization puts it on its list of essential medicines. It's also used in countries that don't have a lot of money for terrifically effective treatment of ulcers. So it's been around for a long time. It's used in veterinary medicine for treatment of ulcers. The story has it that in the 80s in Brazil, women living under a very restrictive abortion law and taking misoprostol for ulcers came to understand that, oh wow, I'm having a miscarriage from this drug, and word spread, and women throughout the red part of Latin America began using misoprostol in order to bring on contractions early in pregnancy. So just to be really clear about what it is and what it isn't, it's 1/2 of the drug that you would use in this country when you go in for a medical abortion. Our drug in this country is mifepristone. It's a better drug. It's 98–99% effective. You can use it effectively depending on state laws. It's gotten caught up in FDA politics, but surely you can use it effectively through 12 weeks. It is expensive. The formulation is more expensive, and it's hard to get in those red countries because it doesn't have an independent use. Misoprostol, by contrast, has an independent use, taken at the right time, meaning in the first trimester of pregnancy, at the right dose, the right drug, not an alterated drug. It's around 90% effective, meaning that it will bring on a miscarriage. The biggest side effect is heavy bleeding. When you go to a hospital bleeding heavily, doctors are not freaked out because they see women bleeding heavily all the time. 1 in 4 pregnancies end in miscarriage. Women arrive every day at the hospital bleeding heavily. There are no tests, at least not yet, to indicate whether you're bleeding heavily because you took misoprostol as opposed to whether you're having a natural miscarriage. So the face of illegal abortion in Latin America involves a smartphone, a couple of dollars, and access to somebody who's selling this on the street. This is how you get it. And even in a country where people are living on $2 a day, they have smartphones. So the biggest problem is who's left out. But just before I go there, I want to just underscore my point that I went in thinking women are dying everywhere. This is the red zone here. It's out of date, it's 2008, so at the beginning of the use of misoprostol and smartphones, and even then, rates of death from illegal abortion are plummeting. Which doesn't mean like, oh, it's like not a big deal. It is a big deal. It's a big deal because the risks of illegal abortion vary by class, age, geography, education level, and race. So in El Salvador, maybe race isn't as salient an issue as it might be here, but a teenager living in a village might have the smartphone, but doesn't have a way to get the cash that she needs to travel by bus to a city where there's somebody on the street willing to sell the drug. She also doesn't have an easy way to figure out how far along she is. And misoprostol, while it works great in the first trimester at terminating a pregnancy, will bring on life-threatening hemorrhage if taken later in pregnancy. So what happens when abortion is illegal and a country is convinced that what it wants to do is enforce its laws is that the hospital room becomes kind of a crime scene investigation. Because what you've got are women buying drugs illegally, and we already know from our experience with painkillers that when there's a big demand for illegal drugs, there's very little the government can do to stop that at the demand. You could do some sting operations, but even with the sting operation, the charge that you would bring wouldn't be an abortion charge. It would be you attempted to buy an illegal medicine. Right? I mean, we can't really even call that attempt abortion yet. Well, I don't know about proximity rules, but I'm not going to get too law professor-y. But it's not clear that you've actually gone down the road enough to be prosecuted for attempt abortion. So the criminalization effort all centers on women coming into the hospital, right? And like, as I said, the Fiscalia, the prosecutors have gone to the hospitals. They've said to the doctors, you have a duty to report. The doctors have responded in 2 different ways. The first way is to say, I've got a supervening duty of confidentiality to my patients. It goes back to the Hippocratic Oath. I don't have to divulge, and in fact, I'm ethically enjoined not to divulge patient confidences. So you can't force me to breach my patient's confidentiality. On the other hand, the state has made it okay, permissible, to make a report without being sanctioned or sued for it. Think child abuse and neglect laws. If you have a good faith belief that your patient has terminated the life of her fetus, and in El Salvador, the first line of the Constitution is, literally the first line of the brand new post-Civil War Constitution, first line, a fetus is a human being from the moment of conception. That's their first line. That this is so important to them as a country, that it's the first line of their Constitution. So a doctor who believes that his patient has done something deliberately can pick up the phone and make a report without fear of being sued by the patient for breach of confidentiality, right? So here again, I thought, okay, now I know what's going to happen. You'll get the doctors who have strong beliefs about life making reports, and you'll have doctors who are like, you know, never making reports, right? Like that's what will happen. Instead, no. The Agrupation is this group of activists, lawyers, doctors, social scientists, and what they did was they did the country's first study of every single report that went into every single police station around the country. It's a small country, a little bit of legwork, but you can do it. They actually tracked over a 10-year period, 129 arrests. I'm going to pause right there. 10-year period, full enforcement, complete ban on abortion. You're getting around 10 arrests a year. These laws are impossible to enforce. 129 arrests. Of those 49 prosecutions, 36 of them came in as aggravated homicide. I have so much to say about this, but I really want to talk fast enough that I can get time for questions and answers here. But what I need to tell you about these cases here, these aggravated homicides, is that they're cases that don't involve abortion at all. You've got a woman who comes in from the poorest sectors of society, having lost her pregnancy in an obstetrical emergency. She falls on the steps to the latrine. She goes into labor. Her family doesn't have a car. They take the tin can with the coins in it. They stand on the side of the road. They hail down a driver who drives them to the nearest public emergency hospital, where the doctors suspect her of having deliberately done this because they look at the patient across a class divide that is so massive that they can't imagine she actually wanted this baby. They think to themselves, and I don't know if I put the pictures in this slide now, I didn't put the pictures in, but they think, she lives in it's a dirt floor, she's got 2 kids by 2 different fathers, she's living with her parents, her own father is blind. I visited these homes. There's chickens walking back and forth. There's no money at all. They think to themselves, she couldn't have wanted this. There's many cases in which they say, oh, she was raped. Of course she did this on purpose. They use her trauma as part of a motive evidence, and they call the police, and she's reported and prosecuted. And of course, as would be the case here as well, when the poorest people are flagged for prosecution, they often lawyer up with the poorest lawyers. And so they don't get the solid defense that they need to say, wow, you didn't even show live birth here. What are you doing charging me with homicide? So the amazing thing about these cases is that the Agrupation has taken them on rather than saying, these cases have nothing to do with abortion, we're not interested, they're like really awful deaths of almost newborns. Instead, they've taken them on, and they've now secured, I think there have been actually 45 women sentenced on that. They've secured 28 of them are now free, but it's just a one-by-one wrongful conviction process, just getting the right lawyers, getting the right evidence, and handling those cases. Okay, full stop. All of it would happen here. I mean, exotic, it's El Salvador, it's so foreign, it's the third world. Every bit of what I saw there will happen here. Abortion won't disappear, it's going to remain legal in some states. Folks with money will have no problem getting on the airplane and getting themselves a legal abortion. The only thing that they'll need is money and time. Abortion drugs will be everywhere. They already are. They already are. Restrictive laws will disproportionately affect the poor. They already do. So the thing that has haunted me in the past year, and I think that it's, I think that's what I meant when I said at the beginning, boy, it just feels different to talk about it now than it did a year ago. The thing that has haunted me is that I can't understand why that world is one that either side really wants to get to. And so I spent a lot of time in Oklahoma trying to study what pro-life lawmakers want to do with the law, doing a lot of interviews, and a lot of that is actually in the book. It was super interesting and clearly helped me step back from the two-dimensional, reductive way that we fight over abortion and to understand what pro-life people want. I didn't announce it before, but I'm pretty sort of unflinchingly pro-choice and have been forever. And yet I want to understand what is going on in our battle, what we think will change. And I came to see that the law has a symbolic value to both sides, that the law actually has an expressive function, as we call it, and both sides care deeply about what the law says, what the message that the government is sending says about abortion. The pro-life's world outrage that abortion legalizes killing is sincerely held. And I think it's matched by the pro-choice world's insistence upon the full legal autonomy of pregnant people. So honestly, I don't see how we're ever going to resolve that symbolic face-off, but it's real. It's real. And I think it's the answer that comes back when you say, well, abortion's not going to go away. You won't be able to enforce it, so what's it about? The answer is, it sends the right message. The perverse consequences, though, are that I think our blinkered focus on legality distracts us from what is clearly a better question, how we think things might change. And it's a better question because abortion is driven here as there by constraints on motherhood, right? By money, by education, by our relationships, by work. I reduce it often to a sense of by money, because I think about what it is in other countries in the world where they really want their babies and how you can actually, as a country, set a different price point for motherhood. So I've been working in Israel lately, where they want their babies for reasons that are problematic, at least to me, but like understandable perhaps. They want their babies, and so here's a child allowance. Here's your 2-year paid maternity leave. Here's the free daycare in your neighborhood. Here's your flexible work schedule. Your life will not end if you have your baby at 19, because guess what? We want that baby. Right? France is doing the same thing. Lowest abortion rate anywhere in Europe. Highest fertility rate, still just below replacement rate. But what they've done in terms of trying to build up a pro-motherhood, a pro-natalist culture is really noticeable. I wonder a little bit about our policies. Do we want these babies? What are we doing around this? The price of motherhood is so high in this country that the single biggest shift that occurs for a person once she has a baby is the cost of diapers, $80 to $100 a month. Do you know how that works for a poor person? 1 in 3 babies in this country suffers from diaper shortage. They're staying too long in wet diapers because their moms don't have money. And if pro-life and pro-choice people can't agree that that's a problem, then we are not working hard enough. So it's naively optimistic, but I don't see any way forward other than to actually force us to shift from this conversation to actually looking at what causes women to want to abort in the first place. I'm going to stop there. I'd love to take your questions. Yeah, wide open. On methodology, if you want to talk about that, on substance, on politics. Yes?
Hi, thank you so much for this discussion. My name is Raquel, and I work for Planned Parenthood. I was born in Guatemala, and I'm a grad student here, so that I get out there. But my question is, why did you pick specifically El Salvador and Nicaragua? Is it because they are the worst when it comes to abortion services and access to it in Central America? And did you consider the other countries around them as well?
Yeah, so when I started, there was Chile and Salvador and nothing else. In the past 10 years, we've seen, well, Nicaragua was just starting. Honduras has joined. I can't remember, there's a few others that have the complete ban. So for sure I wanted the complete ban. When I went to Chile, there was something so familiarly dismissive about the law that it felt wrong to base myself there. I mean, it was just sort of the abortion ban is there, but it's like, it was mostly Pinochet did this when he was leaving office. It was his deal with the Pope. For those of you who know the history, he had slaughtered tens of thousands of his people and wanted some kind of absolution. And so the last thing he did before stepping down was go visit the Pope, and he came back and banned abortion. It's pretty amazing. But the attitudes of people to the law, it wasn't like a sense of pride. It was almost an afterthought. And even for my friend, the law professor, she's like, okay, there's 5 prosecutions a year, 5 max. So in El Salvador, it's like, no, but we don't even talk about this in public. Everybody agrees abortion is murder. The agrupación, the activists were, the secrecy around that meeting made it clear that we're starting from a place where people have a ban, they like a ban, and we're trying to enforce a ban. So it was really clear to me that that's where I wanted to start. Nicaragua had the ban, they were 5 years into it, and they weren't really enforcing it. It's a mess to try to enforce it. I mean, that's the piece that really interested me. So it was just the easiest way to go. And then El Salvador is just an amazing place. It's like a little bit raw. I mean, it never occurred to me like what it would have felt emotionally to be in a place 10 years after a civil war, where people are really, like, you're raw and your level of trust is eroded and you're building a place from scratch, and conversations around values surface more readily there than in Chile, where it's just, same old, same old. So it was like, that was easy. And I loved people and that helped.
I was wondering, I know that we have like the gap rule, which kind of like prevents other countries from supporting abortion. How does that influence El Salvador that you went to? And then is the U.S. belief on abortion have an influence on the laws and policies that were created in Latin American countries?
It's a really good question. It's like, what are we exporting? Because we do export a lot in terms of abortion policy, and we've been doing it cyclically whenever there's been a Republican administration. The Republicans' first thing is to reinstitute what's called the Mexico City policy. So we are the world's biggest funder of contraception, and whole countries around the world rely on us to build their budget for reproductive health. And we have under what's called the Mexico City policy, I believe it started in the early 90s, although that doesn't quite line up because that would have been Clinton. So maybe it started before, maybe it was Reagan. But we have a policy that anybody receiving this money can't give any counseling at all about abortion. That if you are a clinic and you're receiving our money, then if a woman comes to you and says she doesn't want to be pregnant, you have to say, I can't help you. Right? Otherwise you lose all your funding. Incidentally, the current administration has endeavored to shift our policies here, so anybody receiving Title X funding in the United States would be threatened with loss of all funding if they give any advice at all. You're not allowed to mention abortion. But I'm going to sort of put a full stop there, because actually in El Salvador, my sense is that it wasn't the Mexico City policy that was affecting anything on the ground. They actually had a pretty good infrastructure for contraception. It was legal. Women who were married and were partnered and had their act together were all using some form of long-acting contraceptive. Teenagers, not at all. Right? 1 in 3 births in El Salvador is to somebody under the age of 18. 1 in 3 births is to somebody under the age of 18. The average age at which children finish going to school is 14. Right? So it's kind of a miracle that they wait 4 more years to have their babies, right? Rape is so rampant in El Salvador that when you go on the U.S. State Department's warnings, they warn U.S. women, we cannot vouch for your safety. Rape is commonplace and not prosecuted. Like, it's on the travel advisory. So the sex contraception and sort of autonomy problem is really, I think, much more enmeshed in the abortion issue than is our Mexico City policy. Where you do feel the export of U.S. policy, I think, really intensely, is on the right to life front. So Si a la Vida is their right to life there. It's run by a Catholic woman who is very linked in nationally or internationally with us, is very proud. She sees herself as the flag bearer of the right to life movement because they're the only ones with a ban. The first chapter of my book deals with a woman who was carrying a fetus without a brain, anencephalic, was not going to survive. In any other country around the world, you would immediately terminate because it doesn't have a brain, it won't survive. On top of that, she had lupus, she had a health condition that made it actually life-threatening to have a baby. She had almost died. She'd been in intensive care for months with her first pregnancy, which they had to take at 7 months. and the child suffered significant cognitive deficits as a result. She shows up pregnant a second time, and this woman from Si a la Vida leads a crusade saying we're not going to let them murder her baby. So Beatriz is her name. She brings up a petition to be able to terminate. And the pro-life world starts petitions around the murder of Beatriz's baby. It's pretty astonishing. And I feel like a lot of that is a direct export. The rhetoric around it. I mean, I don't want to say it's an export because I think it comes quite honestly from who she is and what she believes, but then there's like an echo effect, maybe. Yeah.
Actually, that leads me to my question. Ellen Cosgrove from the School of Medicine. How do the countries with total bans deal with issues like severe lupus with cerebral involvement or severe heart failure where actually continuing the pregnancy will result in the death of both mother and baby?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I'm really glad you asked it. And I talk about it a little bit in the book. The docs are really suffering. The highest, there was actually just last spring, the Ministry of Health did a slideshow on who's dying from illegal abortion, and they phrased it as deaths due to the ban on abortion rather than who's dying from illegal. So what is the deaths due to the ban? The highest number of deaths due to the ban were ectopic pregnancies, because you're not allowed to, and ectopic is in the tube. It's not going to go anywhere. It's going to just explode the tube and you'll start to bleed. So what would happen in this country is you'd get it out, right? And ideally you'd get it out early enough and quickly enough that you'd save the tube so that her future fertility wouldn't be impaired. In El Salvador, because of the law that says that the minute of conception, and they like literally fertilization is their conception notion, not implantation. So you have to sit and watch and wait, and you keep her under an ultrasound, and then when it explodes, you scramble to try to save her life. It's crazy, right? The doctors are just hamstrung. The second of their, like, what happens when abortion is banned, who dies, is the undertreatment of cancers. So women come in with, just say, a fast-growing breast cancer. You know exactly what you would do in the States, or really in any uterine cancer, anything around the world. You terminate the pregnancy and you start the chemo. They can't. So they do an experiment of one. Right? We'll try to light dose the chemo and see what happens. Right? It's really hard to live with yourself as a doctor. The doctor who handled Beatriz's case, pro-life Catholic guy, really just never would have thought that his life would become entangled. He's a high-risk obstetrician, and he watched this case unfold and ended up leaving the country. I mean, he now works in North Carolina. The trauma of watching your patients suffer and die, and their mothers. So it's like the collateral damage. It's not just like this woman wants to wear a bikini and so she's having an abortion. It's this mother will die and will leave her children orphaned. And the men are all, I didn't really flag this, but the working-aged men in El Salvador, they're here sending money home. I mean, 1/6 of Salvador's economy is from remittances from people working in the States. So when Beatriz dies, it really is that there's nobody left to care for her child. So yeah, the doctors are they're becoming activists though, that's the interesting thing. So in the past couple of years, the agrupación, the activists have shown me so much about how one responds to what seems to be a majority belief that abortion should be illegal. And so they've gone to the same hospitals to talk to doctors about confidentiality. Right? This is your confidentiality, this is your right of practice, these are things that you should know, and sort of try to bolster their strength rather than allowing just the prosecutors to have the only voice in the hospital setting.
So I really appreciate the talk. I've thought a lot about the expressive function problem you're talking about and wondered a lot about that. And I couldn't see on your map, I could see the red and the green, but I couldn't see really what the blue and the yellow was. But I've wondered often if, say, the blue and the yellow are presumptively illegal places where there's a lot of exceptions.
Yeah.
Does that create a different dynamic where you have this expression that we don't want to legalize abortion, but that we understand that there are exceptions, and does that create less of this dynamic that you're talking about in the ban versus the...
Yeah, So I first want to say that I haven't spent time in the Blue Places studies, and so I'm a little bit hesitant to answer for it. I've read a lot about Germany, which has an interesting compromise law that has, when they reunited Germany, they took East Germany's liberal law and West Germany's very restrictive law, and they compromised with a law that says you've got to go to counseling, and then you'll get the counseling, and the counseling is it's pro-life counseling. We're going to counsel you about ways you can keep this baby, rights that you have to funding, information about alternatives to abortion. But then ultimately, once you've done that, then I think you can have it in the first 3 months. And it seems to be both the expressive function, we don't think this is a good idea, and then a sort of a recognition that the law needs to regulate it. Israel, which is where I'm doing research now, is, I think I would put it in blue, because the law reads, abortion is illegal except on one of the following 4 conditions, and in order to meet these 4 conditions, you have to go to a committee and tell your story. The committee is 2 doctors and a nurse, and the conditions are, if you're under 18 or over 40, that's fine. If you're single, that's fine. If it's a fear of fetal anomaly, that's fine. If it's maternal life or rape or incest, I'm already past 4, or if you're married but it's not your husband's baby. So it's a little bit like one of those LSAT problems where you're like, okay, where to go? So it turns out that what they're doing is they're expressing a view that married women who don't have a good excuse should have their babies. Right? If you're between 18 and 40 and you're married and it's a normal, healthy pregnancy, unless you've got a pretty significant depression here, we really are going to want you to have your baby. So that's the expressive function. Then the weird thing that happens is that 98, 99% of women who come to the committees get approved. So it's like, okay, we've expressed our position here, you've heard it, you've had to shame yourself perhaps in coming before us, and now you can go have your abortion. And like when I've done my interviews there, people will say, well, after all, if she doesn't want it, then why would you make her have it?
So you talked about shifting the discussion towards what we can do to encourage and show that we want these babies and providing mothers with resources to lower the cost of motherhood. When you're talking to some of the pro-lifers about this, would you talk a little more about what sort of responses you're getting and areas in this country where you think there either has been a shift towards that or has not been a shift towards that?
Yeah. So I'm glad you asked the question because it gives me a chance to talk about my favorite project that's going on, although it's still, I was going to say embryonic, but it feels like I shouldn't say that. It's still sort of in its beginning stages. So when the book came out, I got an email from a woman named Julia Haydock, and she's a professor, a classics professor at Baylor. And her email said, I've probably prayed outside of the abortion clinics where you volunteered, and yet I hear your message and I'd like to talk. So it was one of those emails that just like, I'm like, oh God, you know, I might have conjured this person up, but I do not want to talk. Like my book is all about, like, you guys should all be talking about that better question, but like, let me never have to have a conversation. And like, while it sounds like I'm having conversations in the book, I'm interviewing, right? I'm not doing the hard work of saying what I believe and listening to what you believe. I'm just asking questions. And I like doing that, right? Like, there's no skin in the game. So I talked to her, and that started in January of 2018, and we've talked every couple of weeks since then. Santa Clara brought her out for a sort of a conversation between enemies in the abortion war, and had us sit in a room filled with alums, so a lot of Catholic alums, my school's a Catholic school, and students from the Bay Area, so students who are really progressive. And we modeled, more than the substance, we modeled the process by which you talk. And it tracked largely our conversations, which begin with, why do you care about this issue? Not like, what do you think, should it be legal or illegal, but why? And the minute you start with why, like, she stops being two-dimensional, I stop being two-dimensional. Right? Like, now I understand in ways that I didn't what it means when someone says, like, look, this is life, right? And I can't just back down. And she understands what feminism means. I mean, she missed that day in school. And so it had never occurred to her to focus on why a woman might have an abortion and how patriarchy sets the price of motherhood too high. And so, I mean, whole worlds have come into view for us. I never really thought about my work in reproductive justice as being tied to my religious beliefs. In talking to her, I actually understand that I'm doing this as a Jew, that my religion demands of me an obligation to see my neighbor, love my neighbor as myself. This obligation or injunction to, it's called tikkun olam, to repair the world, has me going and thinking along these lines and has my entire career. It's just that the religious frame was something that they claimed. So in conversation like that, there's a shift that I think is perhaps a precondition to get into the platform. We can agree on the national diaper shortage, but when it comes to like, okay, how much did the government subsidize daycare? Or what do we do around adoption and promoting adoption? It gets tense. We're doing a talk that is pretty exciting at Yale next fall. All the pro-life Ivy League students are gathering at Yale for this conference, and they've set a panel on alternatives to abortion, and they're bringing us in to talk about it. So I'm hopeful. I know that within my world right now, my world meaning the people that are out there planning for pro-Roe, post-Roe America, and like the sort of what has to happen to keep people safe without legalized abortion. I know that most of us aren't thinking, okay, like we're going to forge common ground with the other side. But I have to believe that as we shift toward post-Roe America and states that are devoutedly pro-life realize it's not going away, there should be for some a sense that while the expressive function of the law is not enough here, if we're pro-life, we have to do something to offset these costs. And the folks that I met were either anti-abortion or pro-life. There are differences, there's daylight between them. They've been lumped together for reasons of convenience, and in part because of the way that pro-choice people have structured it. You're with us or against us. I believe that we'll see some shifting on that, I hope. Stay tuned. Living in interesting times. Thanks for your attention. If you have questions that you don't want to ask from the group, I'll be hanging out. So.
Thanks for forwarding that. I think you're books.